morning to all of you and a very warm welcome to today's program where Ranjit Hoskote will be in conversation with Dr. Sudhir Kakar, well-known psychoanalyst and writer himself, on the book Confluences, Forgotten Histories from East and West. This book has been authored by Ranjit Hoskote and Elijah Projanov. Last evening, Ranjit had released his book. It was actually a worldwide release, first time in Goa. Dormore's selected poems at the hands of Shri Damodar Mauzo. These programs are all co-organized with Goa Writers Group. And this is like a curtain raiser for our grand finale, the Goa Arts and Literary Festival in December. Well, briefly, Ranjit Hoskote is a well-known figure in the literary world and needs no introduction. But for the benefit of all, he is a poet, cultural theorist, critic and curator, and has written many poems, won many awards, and curated more than 20 contemporary art exhibitions. The book Confluences, Forgotten Histories from East and West, just briefly about it, is about defiance of the current tide of national and cultural neo-tribalism sweeping the world from North America and Europe to India and the Arab countries. And the lifeblood of culture is confluence, the mingling of dissimilar and even contemporary elements. No culture has ever been pure, no tradition self-enclosed, no identity monolithic. This condition is organic to a planet knit together by transcontinental pilgrimages and transoceanic trade routes, by the motives of war, love, restlessness, and inventive curiosity. Since all cultures grow from the constant merging of the familiar and the strange, the authors argue any attempt to isolate a culture within itself will only damage that culture. Well, with this short introduction, I invite both Ranjit Hoskote and Sudhir Kakar to enlighten us further. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for both of them. Thank you.
I am, as mentioned, a part of Goa Writers. Goa Writers is a group of writers based in Goa who have been active for the last 6 or 7, almost 7 years. We meet once a month to critique each other's works, and we also conduct get-together where we went to discuss writings and writing associated events. We've also produced an anthology of our writing inside out last year. To expand a little on Nandini's introduction of our guests today, Dr. Sudhir Kakar, before we get on with the discussion of the book. Dr. Kakar is a leading figure in the field of cultural psychology and the psychology of religion, as well as a novelist. Some very prestigious publications have listed him among one of the top 21 thinkers of the 21st century. His books include The Inner World, The Indian's Portrait of a People, Mira and Mahatma, The Ascetic of Desire, Ecstasy, a translation of the Kama Sutra, The Crimson Throne, and of late his memoir, The Book of Memory, and an edited volume on dreams and dreaming. His books have been translated into 21 languages around the world. He lives in Kanauli in Goa. Ranjit Hoskote wears many hats. He is well known as a poet. Yesterday was a world release of the poems of Dormore's. As an art critic, as a cultural theorist, and an independent curator. As a poet, he is author of 4 collections of poetry. Has translated the Marathi poet Vasant Abaji Dahake. He has also co-translated the works of Elijah Projanov. Has edited an anthology of contemporary Indian verse. In 2004, he was the Sahitya Akademi honored him with the Golden Jubilee Award. Among his work in poetry, he has also translated the 14th century Kashmiri mystic poet Lal Ded, known as Laleshwari. And the book is titled I, Lala, the poems of Lal Ded. As cultural theorist, his the CV is very lengthy and impressive, but let me quote from there. Many of us have seen the column, The Speaking Tree, in the Times of India. That was a column started by him, a column on spirituality, sociology of religion, and philosophical commentary. He was principal art critic for Times of India from 1988 to 1999, and he's also written a number of monographs on prominent artists: Jihad, Sabawala, Tahir Mehta, Baiju Pathan, and others. As a cultural theorist, Hoskote has addressed the cultural and political dynamics of post-colonial societies that are going through a process of globalization, emphasizing the possibilities of a non-Western contemporaneity, intercultural communication, and transformative listening. As a curator, his first exhibition, Hinged by Light, was curated at the age of 25. In 2011, he was invited to act as curator for the first ever professionally curated National Pavilion of India at the Venice Biennale, organized by the Ranjit Hoskote. So, there's a lot more we could say about our two very venerable guests, but we shall move on to the book. I will just play a very small role in taking the conversation forward. Just to expand again on the brief note on the book by Nandini, let me read from the blurb of the book, published by Yoda Press. Exhilarating in its historical scope and depth of insight, Confluences is a primer for all who are committed to leading lives enriched by diversity. This book also carries urgent political significance in an era shaped by ideologues of differences, who divide the world between an us to be protected and a them to be destroyed. It's a salutary guide to those perplexed by jihadist violence, the US-led coalition's misadventures in the Arab world, the contest between Islam and Eurocentrism, the turbulent face-off between reformist and conservative movements in North Africa, and the confrontation between Hindutva and liberalism in India. So, according to Dr. Kakar, you have some comments and notes.
No, I think, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You might want to bring it. We don't really have. So I'm only a statist here, and he's the main actor. So I will just put not the question, but keep on talking about the book. You've already described it in summary. Tell me, Ranjit, how you, this is the first question everyone asks, how you came to write the book with India.
Well, thank you in the first place for the opening and contextualizing remarks, and Sudhir, thank you very much for engaging in this conversation. And in fact, it is in conversation that this book was born. Because Ilya and I have now known one another for a fairly long period of time. And around the time of the 9/11 incidents, we suddenly realized that many of the things that fascinated us could in fact be turned into a series of essays. I mean, this just arose out of the outrage of the kind of Islamophobia that one saw in the world, and the deliberate popular and academic misunderstanding of various others, whoever those others might be. So that resulted in 2 or 3 articles that we wrote for the Hindu, for the Süddeutsche Zeitung, etc. And then it gradually occurred to us that from various parts of our life, our interests in the pilgrimage as a form, our interests in post-colonial contemporaneity, our interests in music, that there were many themes that were common to us. I mean, both of us share in different ways and to different degrees experiences of cultural displacement, multi-local belonging, and so on. So rather than being abstractions, many of these were very core existential concerns for us. They just sprang out of, not out of an abstract intellectual project alone, but out of just the very basic existential question of making sense of ourselves as people drew on diverse traditions and locations. So that was really the beginning. And we brought to it, and as we continued with the project, we realized how much we were breaking with established notions of East, West, Europe, India, because some of the parts of the book that have to do with India were actually written more by Ilya than me, and the parts that have to do with Europe were my contribution in a certain sense. So even in the way we worked, we crisscrossed these lines, and that was part of the adventure of writing the book.
I think the history of the book, I also give it. It was very interesting to see that it was translated into German in 2007, and the translation was published first, then the book itself. Now, how did that come about? Also, I think you know, very interesting that you both work together, because in English one, you are the lead author, in the German one, Ilya is the lead author. On the cover, you are the one, inside it is Ilya. So how does all that come about?
You know, the working model for us was the Jugalbandi, very much.
Okay.
So
who was the tabla player?
I think we took turns on all the instruments involved. So as you correctly say, at various levels we've turned that around. Apart from the fact, of course, that in the German publishing context it made sense for Ilya to go first, and then in an Indian context for me to go first. But in each case we've twirled that around. Because the book really was literally written together, across the table, in the archive, through conversation.
Okay, now to maybe do the substantive stuff. I think you mentioned it already, and this was my impression also, that, and you perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, that it was really the context of the Islamophobia which kind of spurred or was the origins of the book, because that seems to be the theme which is running. Islamophobia in Europe, very much so, and then of course the India, which is spread all over the world. Would that be correct to say that this was the main, that is the main context of it?
I think that was the main trigger. But as one explored this question of Islamophobia, it led us to another question which preoccupies both of us, which is the question of our very vexed modernity. And the fact that as you unpack many movements that seem to be medievalist or revanchist, as you well know, they turn out all to be figures of modernity. So there's a section in which we go into the intellectual context of jihad, and this was part, of course, of this project of dismantling or confronting Islamophobia. But the fact is that, and these very unlikely protagonists who stand at the head of this tradition of jihad, which is essentially a form of modernist self-assertion. Somebody like Saeed Qutb, the Egyptian thinker, who was not an alim, never trained in a madrasa, but was actually a professor of English literature, and a poet, a modernist poet, originally an admirer of Eliot and Yeats, and someone who was connected to the Dewan group of young modernist writers in Cairo. But on impact with the actual American way of life in Chicago, he retreated and became a critic of colonialism, decided that he needed to reimagine a religious identity for himself, and then joined the Muslim Brotherhood, and with results that have played out over the last few decades, and which we now see in action in Egypt. So there was also a storytelling aspect to this project, which was on the one hand academic inquiry, but also, we wanted to bring these narratives into play. So instead of having these windy abstractions that occupy the popular consciousness, no one speaks of jihad, but what exactly is it when you look closely at it? So that was one. But of course, the other project was also to bring back to life the incredible and kaleidoscopic globalization of the Middle Ages. The whole traffic of stories, goods, ideas, people, from between India, Iran, North Africa, and Europe. and to also then involve ourselves in this debate of what is the origin of Europe, for the matter of that. So at various levels, it was dismantling the essentialisms on which we base our identity, and to look closely at the rich hybridity from which all of our cultural positions emerge.
Just a small question I'd like to bring in here. There's this book, The Clash of Civilizations, where he posits that there is an inherent difference between the two, the Western and the Islamic world, and they will never agree or they will never come to some common ground. Does your book demolish this altogether, or is it in opposition to it?
No, I mean, I think, yes, needs to answer. But there's a very interesting point about the book Clash of Civilization. Now it is how many years old? Nearly 20 years old. And every intellectual will feels still compelled to attack it. There must be something to it which keeps on drawing people and still beating that horse. So that horse is not completely dead, see. Now why is it that horse not dead? Is it because there's still some life in it? Why is it so? You can answer that one, since I think this book is also one of the beatings of the Sam Huntington, yeah.
I think what we sort of did was to give the Huntingtonian horse a whack and send it on its way, because this book is not meant to be an extended polemic against Huntington. He's one of the points of reference because, for what it's worth, Huntington's book has defined a certain public attitude to these questions. But there's also a passage where we attend to Huntington's own intellectual sources. So rather than the Huntington model, we talk of the Sorokin-Toynbee Huntington model, because Huntington himself draws on prior notions of cultural blocks, and curiously, all of this comes again in the paradoxical way of confluence. This very way of looking at the world comes from a very sophisticated historical account by the North African historian Ibn Khaldun. In the Muqaddimah, he spells out this way of looking at various cultural and political blocks. But it's a much more fluid analysis there, and in the hands of Toynbee and Huntington, it becomes more of a plea for the retention of a certain imperialist outlook, for lack of another word. So the understanding is that these blocks are well-defined, internally consistent, mutually exclusive, and in constant tension. Now the evidence is completely against this. So some parts of this book also have to do with Mediterranean politics between the 14th and 17th centuries. So you look at the extraordinary degree of collusion and collaboration between, say, Venice as an Adriatic republic and the Ottoman Empire. We look also at the ways in which, say, Da Vinci and Michelangelo, who far from working exclusively for the popes and the condottieri, were also writing out contracts and hoping to win assignments from the Ottomans and from the Mamluk sultans in Egypt. So this is a very different kind of Mediterranean imagination. It tells you something about how people really deal with borders. So, I mean, that's just one example pulled out of a hat, because of numerous others. So that's, and also we point out that even at times of tension between empires, or regional blocks, if you will, there was always an interchange at a cultural level, at an intellectual level. So one of the most exciting, well, I wouldn't say discoveries, but something we were able to bring to the book was, for instance, the journey of the Meccan revelations into Dante. This notion that this great allegory of the prophet's journey and illumination feeds directly into Dante's own vision. And this is the journey of an idea and an allegory across religious lines. For instance, again, the book is full of such examples, but taken together they're intended to build into a kind of tapestry that tries to unlock some of these Huntingtonian verities.
Yeah, there is this point where Ranjit speaks about the stories, the Panchatantra, the stories in India which have been told, numerous stories which keep getting told, and then they move across and become 1001 Nights in Arabia, they move further, they become the Canterbury Tales. So the tradition of storytelling continues across cultures, across nations. But wouldn't that be a little broad, a bit, just influences being taken from one place to the other? Isn't that happening all over the world and continuously? How can that help us understand the very fundamental attitudes and blocks that have taken place here? I could ask Dr. Kakar, what is the makeup, psychological makeup of peoples who set themselves into confrontation with each other? Ranjit says that we are all coming from the same cultural resources, our thinking is very broadly the same, but we see evidence all the time of fixed attitudes in conflict. So why does it happen in the minds of people?
I don't know if I agree with that we are all coming from the same and I don't think he would also say that. I think that there are also influences all the time. I think one thing which cultural encounters, I would call it encounters, have been taking place all the time. I'm not talking about the individuals, but even when large colonial or which is very big thing here, the Arab in Spain and Europe, the making of Europe. Now, there can be, the effects are very different. There can be from, there are no winners, losers part. I mean, you can have assimilation, you can have transformation, you can have a reassertion like in Lutwa or other things, or you can have a recreation. So there are all various kinds of it. What I think I missed in it, that it, or at least this part, I'm talking about the Arab and the Spain, that it doesn't talk about the power relations. When the Arabs come in, Europe gets changed. How much did Arab get changed? Much, much less. And I think all the cultural encounters we know of, where the power relations are right, when the Portuguese come to Goa, yes, the Goan culture gets greatly changed. The Portuguese culture, I think, very, very little. So I think this is something I missed in it, but maybe you would like to elaborate upon that.
Yeah, but also I agree with you that the argument of the book is not that we are all the same, because that would commit us then to a sort of unified, unarguable with sort of humanism, which is not the point of the book.
Which is true, but I mean, we are all human.
Yeah, it's true, indeed, that's a given. But more that these cultural and political positions that we embrace have far more complicated origins and consequences. So that's part of the argument. I agree completely with you, Sudhir, when you say that the book doesn't necessarily attend to the power relation. Because to us, what we do is we take for granted that there is a logic of power which produces its own asymmetries. But within that, there are all of these other, if power is a deficit in some ways, then there are all these cultural advantages that evolve in unpromising situations. So that's something that we wanted to look at. But we're also looking, and I agree that with the larger scale we would have probably worked differently. We're also looking at different points in the timeline of these relationships. So at some point we talk of how even within the Islamic world, the reign of reason comes to an end at some point. So we talk about the party of faith, as we term it, is once it comes into the ascendant, much of the liberalism that we associate with Al-Andalus is actually lost, for instance. So that's, and then we pick up the narrative again in the 20th century, when there's a very different kind of borrowing, when you see the roots of jihad in an admiration for Bolshevism, for instance, or with fascist methods of organization and mobilization, or with guerrilla tactics that are actually the heritage of the leftist tradition, and which feed into jihad. So there are very complex, unpredictable, and strange mutual influences. So these encounters take different forms. So that's part of our narrative strategy, if you will. Something else to ask, which I was interested in. Oh yes, I remember what it was. Also, the reason we talk of confluence rather than influence is because we're interested in the, so to speak, third thing. As a psychoanalyst, you will appreciate that, this notion of the Drita Sache. The third thing that emerges from any dialogue between, if you will, therapist or healer on the one hand and a patient or a narrator on the other, or two kinds of people in dialogue, or even in tension, and then there's something else that is produced, a third thing, position, space. So that space of encounter is something that's interesting. But you should really be
No,
specialist.
no, not a specialist. My point only was that that dialogue is much rarer in the history of cultural encounters. Dialogue means an equality, and that does not happen. Mostly it comes as invaders, as much more powerful people, and then there is not a third thing. It's influencing the one person who is being dialogued with. He or she changes much more than the one. So that was the only thing which I wanted to say. That the dialogue part maybe for me was overemphasized. But it happens certainly, and it is one of the most beautiful things if it does happen. But most of the time, I think in historical circumstances, it has not happened. The other interesting point was, I think, that Jihad, but I also noticed the name of Maulana Madudi, who was made, of course, infamous by Naipaul among the believers, who you don't have here. So I was wondering, what do you think of among the believers? I mean, was it a deliberate Naipaul, you go your way, we don't want to read you? He was not in the so that is why I thought you really, I mean, right to be hated, but not that much. What do you think of him? What do you think of him?
It was a great novelist.
Experiment
novels are brilliant.
I was talking about this among the believers, because he also talks of Madhudi there.
Sorry, it's probably an unpopular opinion, but both of Naipaul's books on Islam are complete nonsense.
That's why.
Among the believers as well as the other one, where it goes back. Beyond belief. Yeah. I mean, his basic belief, if you will, is that Islam demolished everything that pre-existed and tried to turn the people and the cultures that it came into contact with into sort of shadow islands. It's completely, not only is it an absurd view, it's an ahistorical view, and it can be contested and demonstrated quite easily. I mean, in fact, it's probably one of the reasons when you think of confluential cultures on a certain scale, they almost always are regions where Islam has interacted with other traditions. And in many ways, I think part of the problem here may be that we look at it out of our own prism. If you look at it out of an Indonesian prism, you have a very different understanding of how these things work. Or if you look at what happens, say, in Morocco, or what has happened historically in Morocco, or in Mali,
or Kashmir,
or indeed in Kashmir, yeah. So there are variants on what happens. And also, this is the reason we are interested in practices such as translation or mutual listening or collaboration. At various points, we're also looking at figures who incarnate these concrete processes by which this kind of transcultural encounter takes place.
Yeah.
We're thinking of, for instance, the Norman kings of Sicily, Roger, for instance, who is completely Arabized at one level. And this is the other example, by the way. The Normans rule Sicily, but they become Arabized. They take on the culture of the people they rule. And he actually commissions the first great atlas in the world. He commissions Al-Idrisi, the geographer, whose atlas is then called the Kitab al-Rujar, the Book of Roger. So it does work the other way too, and historically has done so.
I remember Naipaul only because you mentioned Maulana Madhudi, and he has a very good anecdote about Madhudi. If you remember that, he would tell us about, since you mentioned it, about these people, Maulana Madhudi and the other ones you mentioned here. Not saying that he's on a higher level as well, but
again, I mean, of course, there's much more that we could have done around Madhudi, but I think we were also interested in the ways in which certain people made the transition from a critique of colonialism and a sense of having been oppressed by European colonial regimes, and how they then reimagined themselves for many of them, the first step was to see themselves as part of a global community, an ecumeny, the Ummah, really. You see this in the thought of Iqbal very strongly. Certainly see it in Madhudi's thought. And from there to, some of them took the next step forward, which was that of actively resisting the oppressor, the alien, but that involved them then in a rhetoric which is every bit as oppressive as the one they were opposing. You know, the division of the world into us and them, the notion of a pure primordial identity. So, but again, although his journey was very strange, I mean, he again was not an alien. He was not a cleric, he was a journalist. So for us, it was important. Qutb and Maududi were both important because both of them started from secular underpin. They were secular modern intellectuals who embraced, or in fact, more or less collaborated to invent something that now strikes us as being incredibly medievalist.
History books. And so Naipaul, I remember Maududi still many years ago, because he says Maududi was so much against the West and America, etc. But when he had a heart attack, he took a Boeing, American-made Boeing, and went to American hospitals to get his heart attack treated. And he was against moralism completely. So all that often, so then you remember these kind of sentences that so many critics of modernity, when it comes to their body, what happens? They don't go to Ayurveda or homeopath, they go to those ones. So he was talking about that. So this was the, I thought, both the good part and maybe a danger in it. The good part is that we remember things same way that 20 years ago one would remember. But the danger is you go through such a vast canvas that wouldn't you have some part of it that this book has more literary than historical value?
I'm not sure about historical value, but it's meant to be a provocation to readers who we think are like ourselves in terms of being perplexed. And this, of course, this notion of a guide to the perplexed emerges from Jewish tradition. And the Jewish tradition was actually shaped in Al-Andalus and was Arabophone. In these foundational texts of modern Judaism were written in Arabic. That's side-led and seems inconceivable given today's political situation. But we are really essentially speaking to people who are working through such cultural and political perplexities. So this is, as I say, in the nature of an intellectual provocation. If it gets people to rethink certain issues, that would be the importance of the book. So, but it's certainly not a purely literary exercise if such a thing is possible.
No.
In fact, increasingly, I don't think such a thing is possible.
No.
So
Yeah.
that is what it would be. And in the nature of the literary form, we are pointing more to things that people should reread or revisit. So it's not, it is not a history, but it's an attempt to point towards hidden and lost and eclipsed histories.
Yeah.
A small comment here, closer to India. This issue of us and them in the minds of people, creating in the minds of people, and us who have to be protected, and them who have to be attacked so that we will be safe. Even in India, the organizations like the VHP or right-wing groups would like to project an image of an India which is Hindu or which owes nothing to a Muslim past, and is in denial of the contributions of the Islamic areas of art, architecture, culture, and so much. So are we constantly in a race in the cultural people trying to bring things together, people together, and trace influences show how hybrid our cultures are, as opposed to the political side of it, which tries to separate, alienate, and lead into conflict for their own purposes. And in this kind of a race, I think your book is a very valuable help on our side, on the cultural.
You see, I think the race is because both are true. It is not untrue that there is no group feelings, and there is no they. And it is also not true the other part of it, that there are no one. So it depends which part of which you are emphasizing. And this comes from our human heritage. When you are born as a child, the first time one has the feeling of I am, already means I means there are already others. So that is the at the age of 1.5 is I means there is already separation between I and them. Then as a child at 4 starts learning we. So the moment you say we are, It means that there is a they. So this is a human part of we, they, I, you. That is not to be changed. That cannot be changed. Now, how to deal with this fact, I think, is the important part. Should one say, no, this we already, they are the enemies, and they are in this. I mean, the child starts with first the they, all the dirty part, first goes to the animals, bad dog, bad cat, bad animals. Then it gets to human beings, bad Muslims or bad this one. So this we have from right from the beginning, so it is a very difficult thing to get away with. So the ones who want to bring this on they are enemies are not on a weak wicket. So do not think they are in fact much stronger wicket in the time, because in times of crisis, because whenever there is a threat, bodily threat, you all will go together to live in those. Look at the northeast, they are all fleeing to Assam because they feel a threat. There is now, you can only have shelter in our group. All the other groups are very, very dangerous. So they, of course, always want to create a crisis of this kind, because then people, when a crisis is, you regress, all your reason, etc. goes away. It's only emotion, fear, and that is, you go to the childhood phase, and they want to do that. The others have a more difficult task, because they are appealing to the adult rational reason that this is not such a more difficult task than the one. So do not think that the culture part task is easy. It is much, much more difficult, as long as this threat can be created.
Yes.
And I'm glad to, because I don't have any other questions
And
also.
the
audience.
So we have some messages and then we can.
Try and achieve a balance now. Book and mic and voice. This is a section that's simply called Dante Between Heaven and Hell. If European literature is a city, Dante's Divina Commedia is its cathedral. Stepping in, we marvel at the Christian frescoes adorning its walls and ceiling. The chandeliers, medallions, and other adornments take us back into the Roman past. And from the portraits in the niches, an assembly of contemporaries and ancestors observe us balefully. The dome of the Divine Comedy is breathtakingly high. The structure, with its 3 wings, is imposing. A lasting monument to Christendom's spiritual glory, our learned guide proclaims, a story of how the soul finds healing and transcendence by journeying to hell and heaven. A saga both historically specific as well as allegorical, told in a voice heard for the first time, the voice of humanism speaking in the language of everyday life. This text marks the conclusion of the medieval and the early beginnings of the Renaissance. But afterwards, having admired everything at length and leisure, suitably inspired and transported, we stand in the piazza and look back at the contours of this edifice, and are struck by a sense of déjà vu. The account of this odyssey through hell, purgatory, and paradise, so uncommon at the time to Christian myth, was not new at the time of its Italian rendering. And now we cut to an earlier story, which seems very familiar if you've read Dante. A man of special gifts is awoken at night by an angel and carried up to heaven. The man rides a winged horse, ascends 9 circles, makes a long journey broken by a series of way stations in an other world of confusing strangeness, meeting prophets and men of stature. Above the 9th circle, he finally finds himself in the presence of God. But that was only one part of his journey. After encountering the terrifying guardian angel of hell, the traveler is brought face to face with the circles of the damned, with the sins that call down their punishment and the torments they are condemned to. This terrifying inferno funnels away into the depths of eternal despair. The man in this older story is the Prophet Muhammad, and the story has been told and retold as an apocryphal but very powerful fable throughout the Muslim world since the 8th century. Called Al-Miraj, the ascent, it is known in many variations. some of them baroque in detail, some of them Romanesquely austere, and has inflamed the imagination of many Ottoman and Safavid painters. Incidentally, as against the great belief that the Prophet cannot be represented in iconic form. The Prophet has in fact been represented very often. Things in Topkapi in Istanbul, which curiously are no longer on show. But most of the extant portraits of the Prophet depict him during the Miraj. By the time this vision of multiple heavens and hells reached the Mediterranean, it was already a rich tapestry of many influences. The ultimate origin of the Miraj narratives probably lies in the vivid celestial and infernal mandalas of Hinduism and later Buddhism, which would have flowed into Islamic culture through the Barmecide-sponsored translations in Abbasid, Baghdad. This is a story from that part of the book. This folklore inspired the devotional visions of one of the greatest of the Sufi mystics, some of the greatest of the Sufi mystics, Ibn al-Arabi and al-Mahri. Ibn al-Arabi was a native of Murcia in southern Spain, and in the 12 volumes of his Meccan revelations, he explored a revolutionary path to the divine. And we quote an otherwise impeccably colonial scholar, Nicholson, who points out that the infernal regions, the astronomical heavens, the circles, the mystic rows, the choirs of angels around the focus of divine light, the three circles symbolizing the Trinity, all are described by Dante exactly as Ibn al-Arabi described them. It may be added that Ibn al-Arabi also had a Beatrice, Nizam, the beautiful and accomplished daughter of Makinuddin. In short, the parallelism, both general and particular, reaches so far that only one conclusion is possible. Muslim religious legends must have passed into the common stock of literary culture that was accessible to the best minds in Europe in the 13th century. End of quote. And then, of course, the similarities are so incredible as to be identical. And what is obvious is that there has been a link. And is there a link is then the question. Because this book is at many levels about these missing links. And the missing link, as we identify here, is the fact that Dante's teacher, Brunetto Latini, studied in Toledo and was a translator from the Arabic. And that is how the Meccan revelations actually travel from multi-religious Toledo through these translations into northern Italy and become part of what is now foundational work of both of modern Christianity and of European literature.
The audience must be
itching to get into accent. But I think I would like to say one thing at the end, that it's a very, very welcome book, because it is a voice of reason in all the strong emotions and passions which we all have inside. But that is the only thing we have to navigate through those passions, emotions, that voice of reason, which may be small, which may not be loud, but that is the only thing we have. And so that is why it is a welcome book to contribute to that.
Mike?
Let's build some questions.
Yeah.
Now we talk of jihad and also war on terrorism. Is there any similarities between the two?
When you commit yourself to an annihilationist path, you end up becoming exactly like your enemy. So, to that extent, the war against terror is not only not distinct from jihad, and in the book we actually refer to it as, because parts of the book would refer to that period, of course. So it's things like jihad or the crusade, anything premised on the annihilation of the other, has a logic of its own. You demonize the other, you find reasons for denying humanity to the other, and then you destroy the other. So whether that takes the form of guerrilla activity or drones or the killing of civilians, there is in fact no difference. And this is something people, I think, have to be prepared for. The reason you have to have a war against terror is because for decades you've institutionalized misunderstanding and oppression. So that is certainly a problem. And neither of these can be justified. Because in the end, and if we felt during the writing of this book that there was a problem, is that we couldn't arrive at a program to be offered. We didn't end by saying these are 5 things you should do in order to, whatever, be as noble as this book demands. Because, then you fall into the same trap as the people you're opposing. You're creating programs, demonizing others, and, arguing for complete annihilation at the end. So, if that answers your question.
Yes.
When it comes to some alien or other that has attacked you, then you can take it well and take decisive action and annihilate it from the face of the earth. But what happens when a part of you yourself, a part of you attacks yourself, as in homegrown terror, as they refer to in the US, Timothy McVeigh and other shooters in civilian society who just go around killing people, and sometimes it is connected to international terrorism. But how does society deal with that kind of schizoid nature?
Actually, I don't know of many people who have not had a need for enemies. I think the need for enemies is as great as the need for friends. Now, who the enemy is becomes a problem. So even people who kind of unite, then you put it outside. So if all humankind unite, then you will have the aliens from Mars. So somebody has to be the enemy, and that is why I think the Upanishadic part was that that disappears. I and you disappear, but that is the I and you is the basis of the need for the enemy. Because what do you do about all your bad parts, your animality? Who is? That's not me. That should be someone else who's violent, who loves, who's animal-like, who's dirty. Dirty is the absolutely always used for the enemy. Whether it's a Tutsis about the Hindus or Jews about or Christians about Jews, dirty Jew. Chinese, Tibetans, the dirty Tibetans who eat yak butter and smell. So dirtiness is also has to be done with somebody else. So where does that go? All our bad things, where do they go? You need your enemies. Without enemies, it's very difficult to feel well.
Reminds me of something Milan Kundera wrote once, that every utopia has its septic tank.
Yeah.